Hello everyone, how's it going? I'm Nelson Barboza. This is my final presentation for MGT 500, and the company I've been researching is Tesla. And this is the comprehensive strategic plan for them. I picked Tesla because the second quarter of the 2026 states the strategic problem in one line of results. The company delivered a record of 480,000 vehicles, posted record revenue of $28.2 billion, and its operating income still fell 57% to 398 million, which put the operating margin at 1.4%, as we can see in the slides. Why are we researching these numbers? Okay. Free cash flow went negative for the first time in 2 years. So volume is no longer the constraint on this business. And that is a thread running through everything I looked at. Over the next few minutes, I will talk through where demand was actually moved, what the industry structure allows Tesla to win, what the financials will and will not fund, and then the recommendations, the implementation plan, and the measures I would hold it to, with my humble opinion, as a student that is doing an MBA, that is also really obsessed with Tesla because I'm engineering too. So, market and industry analysis. Let's start with the market. The most useful signal in the quarter is not the delivery total, it is the composition. Tesla's best ever deliveries came in 11 mid-sized markets: South Korea, Australia, Japan, and Chile, and other countries, which is a very different customer map than the one that the company that built the company. In the USA, the peer-reviewed work by Liu and colleagues traces a shared decline to competing models, policy shifts, and controversy attached to the chief executive, and only the first of those is something Tesla can play around. Two, segmentation. Segmentation is the part that changed how I think about this company. The segmentation that matters is defined by regulatory approval rather than by price band or trim. Because active autonomy subscriptions hit 1.5 million, up 56%, which attach rates above 55% of new North American deliveries. That revenue carries a better margin than the hardware it rides on. On the industry side, EWD delivered 560,000 vehicles against Tesla's 480,000. And that settles the question of whether Tesla can win on volume at its current cost structure or not. I think it cannot. And the reason is that it's structural is a structure rather than manage is whether is more of a structural area than rather a reason of management. Since more than 80% of global cell production sits in China, and Tesla itself names battery pack capacity as the limit on near-term production. So the industry conclusion is to compete where the dynamics still favor. So, and that is infrastructure and software. They have the best one. Go with the financial analysis. Number three, the binding barrier is charging, not brand. What does that mean? The financial position splits cleanly in two, and the strategy has to respect both halves. That balance sheet is generally strong. Tesla still holds $43.5 billion in cash and short-term investments. Total assets of 150 billion against liabilities of 61. Debt to equity near 0.11 and a current ratio around 1.94. Those are more conservative numbers than the leverage Zeng documented across traditional automakers. That income statement is the problem. Gross margin fell to 16.8% from 21.1% one quarter earlier. Automotive margin, excluding credit, sits at 16.3%. Operating expenses rose 47%, and regulatory credit revenue collapsed to $150 million from 540. Capital expenditures rose 140%, and that is what pushed free cash flow to negative 1.1 billion. So I read that as a funded transition rather than distress because trailing revenue passed $100 billion for the first time, and trailing free cash is still near 5.8 billion. What the quarter removed was a cushion. So I would manage this as a bounded investment window, gate capital releases against milestone instead of an annual budget, and funded build-out from the businesses that are actually scaling. Since the service revenue grew 50% to 5 billion at a record 650 million of gross profit. That's what I would think. So, what is strategic recommendations? The cost of the subscription cloud. Okay. Putting the analysis together, I restated the SWOT and ran a BRIO on the resource base. And the find that organizes this whole plan is that only two resources clear all four tests, and neither one of them is a vehicle. The supercharger network passes because no competitor can compress land, permitting and interconnection timelines with money, and the autonomy stack passes because the data edge compounds with every fleet mile. Manufacturing tests a parity since PWD is more integrated in cells. Brand is temporary and eroding in several markets. And regulatory credits are a policy artifact rather than a firm resource. That leads to four recommendations, which are these. So, first, open the supercharger network as a paid third-party utility rather than defending it as a moat, which turns the strongest resource into recurring revenue while removing the barrier this research says is binding. Two, secondly, decouple software revenue from vehicle sales through market by market approvals. Because that 56% subscription growth required no additional vehicle sale. Third, localize for the markets where growth actually is, which means accepting India's 15% concessional duty against a $500 million commitment instead of importing at a duty near 70%, which makes sense in my opinion. Fourth and final, qualify cell and cathode supply outside China on a defined schedule, okay, which the literature frames as a structural industry risk rather than a purchasing preference. Now, what are the implementation plan and KPIs? It's three phases. So, the capital that flows evidence rather than a calendar. The first 12 months, the first year, covers third-party charging pilots in two regions. Autonomy launches everywhere, approval is already held, and the capital gaining discipline and all inside the existing capital envelope. Now, let's go through 12 and 36. They carry the India commitment, supplier qualification, and the broad opening of the network, which are the pieces that need new capital and new agreements, as they need to the one that need to put the most effort in. The final phase brings local assembly online and moves the revenue mix into range. Two challenges are worth naming out loud here is that the first is competing for attention because this is simultaneously and ramping robotaxi operations, starting Cybercab and Optimus production, so which makes people more inclined to not drive the car instead of just paying for taxis that it has no commitment, no lease to pay nothing, no subscription. Now, also you need to defend the core vehicle business. So an international program without its own leadership and budget line will lose. The second comes from my own work in municipal infrastructure in mechanical engineering, working in a structural company called Ardura, and we deal with a lot of city programs and infrastructure problems. So putting anything in the ground is a permitting and interconnection problem long before it is a product problem. That is why I would measure energy stalls against interconnection approvals rather than stalls announced. This is for all the charging stations or the Tesla, all the new Tesla centers are gonna be when all this happens, if they need it to happen. So that's why I wanted to point that out. Now, the evaluation sits on the four balanced scorecard perspectives, and every indicator carries a threshold agreed in advance. If automotive margin, excluding credit, drops 15% discreditory capital pauses, sorry, I had problems and saying that, had to write it down. If subscription growth falls below 8%, spending shifts from new market entry to localization where approval already exists. The point is that a shortfall triggers a decision that was already made, rather than a debate held under the pressure. And my conclusion, my next steps, is too close. Tesla is still financially strong, of course, one of the leading companies, is the leading company in electrical vehicles. But its trends have moved and its cost structure has not moved with them. They're not updating, they're not balancing it out. So record volume and record revenue alongside a 1.4% operating margin is what it looks like when a company is still being measured by the business it used to be in. This plan accepts that volume is no longer the growth engine and that the resources surviving a BRIO test are the charging network and the autonomy stack. It funds that transition out of the services and energy business that are already scaling, and it measures progress against indicators that resist flattering interpretation. The immediate next steps are to approve the third-party charging pilots and set the margin floor that gates capital, file autonomy approvals in every remaining European market while standing up to the Indian commitment, and publish the scorecard threshold so the first quarterly review has something real to test against instead of something theoretical. Now, I think this is my opinion. I'm not an expert, so I really hope that you guys understood everything I was talking to and understood my points of view. And if there's anything that you would like to add or ask about, please be free for all. I really appreciate the watching. Thank you so much for watching, giving me your time. I'm looking forward to reading all the comments and learning more about different perspectives and with the different questions. And whatever you need, I'm there for. So thank you so much. I'm really excited to see how you all frame your other companies. Bye bye.